Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, we've got another Picture is Worth 1,000 Words video. In this one, we're going to do, I believe it's a photo series, but it's a set of 4 pictures that all seem to be taken at the same time between when the ship is commissioned and when she deploys to the Pacific. And there's some cool stuff to point out in these pictures. So we're going to go through them, some early World War II stuff, and or at least early for this ship. It's already mid-war. But some early World War II stuff, look at that, and some of the changes that end up being made to the ship over time. It's very interesting, of course, because the Iowas are authorized in 3 successive years, with Iowa and New Jersey being the 1940 ships, Missouri and Wisconsin 1941, Illinois and Kentucky the 1942 authorized ships. They are able to build successively, and some of the changes that are made to Iowa and New Jersey after they're placed into commission will just be built into Missouri and Wisconsin and Illinois and Kentucky. They're planned for. It'll be interesting to see some of these early war configurations of the ship. Plus, this photo set has a nice surprise in it in the last picture, so stick around for that. So our first picture is, it actually has the label on it. This is New Jersey bow starboard quarter. This one, it even has the date on it, which we could have guessed ourselves to at least the month, but 7 September 1943. And like I said earlier, I believe this whole photo set is of the same time period. If it's not all taken at the same time, and because it's from a little bit of elevation, it's likely from an aircraft flying overhead. But it's probably the same flight takes all these pictures. So let's see. We will work our way bow to stern on this one. Is interesting. You can see the crew is out in their dress whites. Because it is September of 43, we know the ship is in the middle of not exactly shakedown cruises. She's already done her shakedown cruises by now, but early training cruises. And we know that this means that she's operating in the Chesapeake Bay out of Norfolk, Virginia. So, September in Norfolk, it's kind of warm, the crew are wearing their whites. Interesting. 7 September, they've got their holiday flags flying, and I'm not sure why that is. If you look at the jack flying at the bow, you can see that it is pretty much the length of the flagstaff draped there, which is pretty big. You can see that they've got their anchor chains out. So they've only got their port side anchor out. The starboard side one you can still see up there. If you look just below the jackstaff at the center hole there in the bow, you can see a cable, or in this case it's a chain, running down there. That is for the paravane. So you can see that she actually has her paravane chain in place at this point. Another interesting thing, if you really zoom in on this picture of the extreme bow, you can see that the that really noticeable bow gun tub is not there. That's interesting. Not only have they not installed the gun tub, there's no metal plating there at all. You know, on Missouri and New Jersey, when they remove the gun tub, they leave a metal plate there around the railing at the bow. Here, you can see that there's something built up, but if you zoom in really close, you can see that the wind is blowing it against the railing stanchions. It's just blue painted canvas, which is common on American battleships. There's a pretty famous picture of Arizona, or it might be Pennsylvania. I'm pretty sure it's Arizona, where you can see the white peacetime canvas stretched over the railing at the bow of the ship. And this is just to keep sea spray from blowing right in there up the bow. And obviously, the Navy likes this because they end up plating it over entirely. Interestingly, the South Dakotas and the North Carolinas never get anything like this. So it probably has to do with the Iowas having that really long, narrow bow, not much buoyancy there, so it tends to bury itself in the waves, which means that you then get a ton of water on the deck. So that plating helps just a little bit. So they're trying it out with canvas, which when this ship was commissioned, probably 20 to 25% of her crew easily were experienced sailors, experienced battleship sailors, especially in the deck and weapons departments. So, like, who knows how to use these big caliber guns? Guys who have done it before. So, like your first classes and your chiefs, they almost certainly served on the pre-war battleships, so they know this trick. You're taking a lot of water over the bow. Well, First Division, who's probably in charge of this, and the forward 60-inch gun turret, they've got some chief who's like, oh, let's just get the sailmakers to rig up some canvas and we'll tie it up there. And then they'll decide later on, shoot, this thing is massive. We've got the reserve of buoyancy. We can put a metal plate up there. All right, so that is an interesting thing. I'd never noticed that before because when you see the ship launched, you see that it does not have that plate at the bow. But then very early on, you see that 20 millimeter gun tub there. Well, it's not there for at least the first May to September. That's 4 or 5 months of the ship's career. Let's see. Okay, as we go aft, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what they're doing with the uniform of the day here. Around those forward 20 millimeter gun tubs, just after the anchor chains, you can see that there's a big group of sailors in, it looks like their blue wool uniforms with their Dixie cups, and yet the majority of the sailors are in their whites. Now you can see that she's got that early war triangle-shaped gun tub up forward there. This will very rapidly be replaced with a pair of additional 40 millimeter quad mounts. And these guns will be redistributed around the ship, including the two at that extreme bow position. Just behind those, you can see the two forward hatches down to berthing, and those also have canvas doghouses rigged over them, which again, you're in port, so it makes sense that you would be have all your hatches open, set condition X-ray throughout the ship. There's no need for watertight integrity, and that'll also get you some ventilation down below there. All right, one macro thing to point out as we're going aft along the ship, you can see that the decks, both the wooden decks on main deck and the O1, the turret tops, and the turret sides, and the sides of the ship, all appear to be the same dark gray or black color. This is Measure 21 camouflage that only New Jersey gets. It is overall navy blue. Technically, horizontal surfaces are deck blue, but it comes out from a distance and in pictures like this as black, which is how she earns the nickname Black Dragon. So she's launched in standard haze gray, but very early on she is painted in this Measure 21 scheme that she will then wear up until she goes into Puget Sound in 1945 and gets repainted in Measure 22. So it's interesting. You can see that very clearly. There was some debate earlier whether the decks early on were painted blue prior to the ship entering the Pacific, and it's really hard to tell in a black and white picture. I'm inclined to say, just looking at the turret tops, which we know are painted dark blue, and looking at the wood decks around them, they seem to be the same color. The deck doesn't look like that blonde that you associate with Holystone teak. So probably when she's painted in Measure 21, they paint the deck. Continuing aft, you can see that she still has the open navigation bridge. You can see 2 levels of conning tower view slits here. Very soon, they're going to put a deck extension around the forward face of the conning tower with glass windows around it. The North Carolina sort of have that sort of superstructure. But it's definitely the first time an Iowa-class battleship, possibly the first time an American battleship, gets an enclosed bridge. Going all the way back to the Age of Sail, the captain stands on the wide open deck, the helmsman is out there in whatever weather. But by World War II, with experience operating in the North Pacific and the North Atlantic during various operations, Jersey gets this unique round bridge as a first try that just matches the original footprint of that catwalk that goes around the forward face of the conning tower, which earlier American battleships didn't even have that. The forward superstructure just terminates in the conning tower. Well, that doesn't leave much space. It's just a walkway around the conning tower. So there's not enough room for guys to walk past each other. There's not enough room to install, say, navigation radars or things like that. Even as much as a desk for the quartermaster to write on, there just isn't room for it. So by converting it to a square bridge on Wisconsin and Missouri under construction, that leaves room, especially in the corners, for more stuff. Looking at the top of the conning tower, I do not see, I can't remember the name of the antenna, but there's a radar antenna that sits up there that's part of the tertiary main battery fire control system. But it does not appear to be installed. Pretty early on in the ship's career, it is removed just because there are so many redundancies built in the ship, you don't need it. I would be surprised if it's been removed this early in the ship's career. It may not have been installed yet, or it might have been installed and it's down for maintenance or something, or it might just be, I'm zooming in on this picture very closely to try and see it, and maybe it's obscured by shadow or fuzzy or something. Ooh! The ship's bell, or one of the ship's bells, is hanging there. Many ships deployed without a bell. Oftentimes the ship's bell was left in port when you go out to war. Sometimes this was to save top weight. Sometimes this was, well, you know, the ship's bell is a big important ceremonial thing, and it doesn't do you any good in combat, so leave it. New Jersey's bell is hanging there. Also important to note, her bell is made out of steel. It's not made out of bronze like earlier battleship bells, so that might also play into it. I remember, well, this would have been about 10 years ago now, I was at the Pacific Aviation Museum on Ford Island, and they had Hornet's bell on display there, CV-8. I'm like, how the heck did you get her bell? She's been sunk. At that point, the wreck hadn't been discovered yet. And even though they have discovered the wreck, they haven't removed anything from it, so far as I know. I'm like, oh, they found it in a warehouse in Pearl Harbor. They had taken it off the ship before she deployed, so she had worn it when she was in the Atlantic. She came over to the Pacific. They take it off, probably before the Doolittle raid. Maybe it's the top weight thing, or maybe it's just because she's about to go into combat, and then it sits in this warehouse and nobody remembers it for 7 or 8 decades. I'm not sure where it is now. It might not still be at the Pacific Aviation Museum, but going there next month, so I will be able to see. Or it might be this month, depending on when this video airs. Also, looking at both the 08 and the 011 level superstructures, you can see that they are significantly smaller than they will be later on. The 08 level is just wrapped around the forward face of the superstructure. Eventually, it is expanded out to extend all the way to the aft stack, so that you've got a walkway around that. And you can, or excuse me, not all the way to the aft stack, all the way to the forward stack. On the aft stack, you can see that there are 3 sailors in their whites up there on the catwalk, but that is only accessible via an exterior ladder. The forward stack they made accessible at a certain point by this, and it also gave them more room for watchstanders up there. Likewise, the 011 level is the forward air defense warfare platform, and there just isn't enough room. So Iowa and New Jersey get theirs extended out on the two sides like a cross. Missouri and Wisconsin under construction get just the forward face extended like a letter T. But as built, they don't have that yet. Also, you'll notice, I can never remember, SK1 maybe, SK2, the air search radar at the top of the foremast, the big bed spring radar antenna, is what the Iowas originally get. This will be replaced by, I think it starts out as SK1 and ends up being replaced by SK2, which is a round dish type radar, which is what you see in most of the models and depictions of the ship. But Iowa and New Jersey are going to go to war with that initially. The ship is flying her Holiday Ensign from the mainmast, which is weird, being anchored and having the jack up. She should be flying the flag from the flagstaff aft of the aviation crane, and she is not, and I'm not sure why that is. They could be shifting colors because they just dropped anchor. They could be shifting colors because they're about to get underway. Or it could be that they have the flagstaff aft folded down so they can use the aviation crane. But it's very strange to me. Oh, that's interesting. The 5-inch guns have bloomers over their barrels, the canvas covers that help waterproof them. These were found to be not very useful, and so they're pretty quickly removed. I'm going to have to go through pictures now and see how soon they were removed. The bloomers on the 16-inch guns are retained throughout the ship's whole career, although they're not on in mothballs when a steel plate is just mounted on there. But the 5-inch guns, they always leak through where the barrels elevate up and down through that gap in the faceplate. And the rubberized canvas bloomers don't really help, so they get taken off at a certain point. And you can see she's got 3 float planes mounted back aft. The Iowas were originally designed to carry 3. They did briefly, but by the time they deployed to the Pacific, or at some point during their deployment in the Pacific, they drop it down to 2. They've got 2 catapults. That's 1 ready to go. That's from each one. It's 1 ready to go and 1 redundancy. They built these ships with so many redundant capabilities that when they actually got in the war zone, they realized, we don't need this, we don't need that. So, interestingly, early on they have 3. And it might just be that, hey, they're training up a new air group, so you put as many as you can on there to get everybody some training. Pilots need a certain number of flight hours per, I'm not sure if it's per week or per month, but per period. So while you're here operating close to the United States, put 3 on there so that you can do that, can get as many pilots trained as possible. And one of the very common things to do in the Chesapeake Bay when you're doing these sorts of trials and shakedowns and training evolutions is to do a lot of main battery firing. So you need planes to spot that. All right, so that's the end of the first picture. Let's go on to the next one. This one is a stern view of the ship. And it seems to be a similar time period, like I said earlier. It does not appear like there is a flagstaff back aft. Interestingly, you see these boat booms coming off of the fantail. I had a question about these earlier. Yeah, and you notice there's an accommodation brow a little bit forward of that on the left-hand side of the ship, the port side. When you are in port like this, use the aviation crane to lower your boats off of the fantail, and then you just leave them in the water. She's anchored in the middle of some anchorage outside of Norfolk. So if her crew gets liberty, they take the boats into port. So you keep the boats tied up in the water. You don't have to have them on the fantail and then lower them in the water and then raise them back out every single time. So the boat boom, and you notice it's got some little Jacob's ladders hanging off of it, some rope ladders. The coxswain and whoever else on the boat crew can walk out on this boat boom, climb down into their boat, ride it over to the accommodation ladder. The crew comes down the accommodation ladder. They go into port. They come back. They drop people off at the accommodation ladder, and then they tie off at the boat boom. These boats will be stored on the fantail between the catapults. When the ship deploys in combat, these boats are left behind, probably in her home port of Pearl Harbor. But that's another thing. The boats were found to be very flammable. They were originally going to be stored in a boat park amidships on the superstructure, like the North Carolinas and the South Dakotas got. And like those ships, those boat parks were removed. On the Iowas, it was while they were under construction, because that's where the midships triple 40-millimeter gun tubs end up being placed, where the boats were originally going to be stowed. And they end up never installing the cranes that were going to be used to access them. So instead, they build rolling carts, put them on the fantail, and that way, the planes and the boats are intentionally left on the fantail outside of the important stuff of the ship. So if they're damaged, like what happens off Guadalcanal, it's not amidships where it's causing huge fires and impacting all your secondary and anti-aircraft batteries. It's on the fantail, and who cares? It doesn't really damage the ship or impact her ability to fight. But even better than that, when you go into a war zone, you fly off the planes and you leave the boats at port. So here, not in a war zone yet, the planes are, the planes are all there, the boats are all here. You notice that on each side of the ship, there's a 26-foot whaleboat still hanging on the davits. These are the quick-to-deploy boats, so if you have a man overboard while you're in the middle of the ocean, it's very easy, comparatively, to turn these davits over the side and lower those boats so that you can pick up that man in the water or do whatever needs to be done, as opposed to having to roll the boat under the crane, use the crane to drop it in the water. It's just easier. So these two boats on the sides are retained on. So if you ever built a model of one of these ships in their World War II configuration, you will see that they have those boats and no others. Another interesting feature, on either side of turret number 3, you can see an angled bank of 3 20-millimeter machine guns on each side, angled in towards the gun. Those are going to be removed and replaced with 40-millimeter guns. Originally, Iowa-class battleships are built with, Iowa has 15 quad 40s, New Jersey has 16, and they will each move their 20-millimeter batteries around to install 4 more. There's 2 at the bow that are where that triangular position are, and 2 more at the stern where these are. So it gives them a little bit more firepower. Let's move on to the next picture. So this picture is broadside on. Here's another change between New Jersey and Iowa and Missouri and Wisconsin. If you look at the midships 5-inch gun director, the Mark 37 director on the starboard side of the forward funnel, you'll see that on the aft end of it there is a searchlight. On the forward end of it there is a single 20-millimeter gun. On Iowa and New Jersey, that gun is up here on the 05 level, which is pretty far away from any 20-millimeter magazines. Of course, they keep a ready service locker there, but it's kind of inconvenient up there all on its own. So on Missouri and Wisconsin, that gun gets moved down to the 02 level, and you see just below that midships triple 40-millimeter stack, there is a gun position that has 2 20-millimeter guns in it. And then below that, a position that has 5 guns in it right over the boat. That one with 2 guns in it on Iowa and New Jersey has 3 guns in it on Wisconsin and Missouri. So that 20-millimeter gets moved down there on those later ships. If you look at the extreme aft end of the superstructure, just before you get to the turret 3 mounted 40-millimeter gun, you will see there is another bell mounted back there. So New Jersey has 2 bells, and they are both being carried at this time. It'll be interesting to see some later war pictures of this ship now and see if they are carried when she actually deploys in the Pacific, or if they are left off. Everything else, this is one of my favorite pictures of the ship. It's a really good broadside view of her, and it gives you just a little bit of the Norfolk skyline there, and you can see the stern of another ship moored just off the port bow of New Jersey. And that's the surprise. Here's picture number 4. This picture shows the French battleship Raichulu. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I've only ever seen it written down. Moored right there in Norfolk next to New Jersey. What the heck is a French battleship doing here? We haven't even invaded France yet. Richelieu was just completed within days of the fall of France. So without even getting her fully stocked and completing shakedown cruises and all that, crew sails her to French North Africa when mainland France is being overrun by the Nazis. She is in French North Africa as part of the Vichy France Navy. Her crew does not turn her over to the Free French at this point. So the British launch a couple of operations to try and neutralize her, because Great Britain has control of the sea against Nazi Germany. You add fascist Italy in that, and Great Britain can sort of hold their own. You add the Vichy French Navy into that, and Great Britain is overwhelmed. So, by neutralizing the French fleet before they can decide one way or another if they're going to fully participate in the Axis or if they're just going to be there, they managed to buy themselves some breathing room. They do not buy themselves any goodwill with the French, and raids like the one on Mirs el-Kabir and others, like the attacks on Raichulu, really harm Anglo-French relations at this point, but it allows Great Britain to stay in the war. So debatably worth doing. Anyway, so Raichulu gets repeatedly damaged during her time in French North Africa, and there aren't really good facilities there to repair her. So, in 1943, when the Allied powers, primarily the United States and Great Britain, invade French North Africa, they eventually recapture Raichulu, and she gets turned over to the Free French, but she's in no shape to fight. One of her 8 gun barrels has been blown off. She's taken some other damage. So the ship is sent to the New York Navy Yard in New York, as opposed to New York Shipbuilding in New Jersey, and gets modernized with American equipment. And the U.S. Navy even makes their first and only 15-inch gun barrel to replace the one that Raichulu has blown off, and they manufacture 15-inch shells for Raichulu because there is no 15-inch supply chain for her, with mainland France being under occupation. And they put a bunch of Bofors 40 millimeters on her, and she is eventually going to deploy with the British Far Eastern Fleet into the Indian Ocean for the later part of the Pacific War. So the naval part of the war in Europe is mostly finished by this point. The German Navy is all but bottled up and defeated. So this is a really great picture. Both ships, Raichulu and New Jersey, are doing their training and trials in the Chesapeake Bay. So on around this date, September 7th, 1943, they both end up in Norfolk Harbor next to each other. And it's one of the few chances you get to see New Jersey next to a foreign battleship. The other chance might be the subject of our next Pictures Worth 1,000 Words. Let me know in the comment section down below if you know what other foreign battleship that is that we've got really good pictures of New Jersey next to. And remember, if you've got other ideas for Pictures Worth 1,000 Words, head over to my Facebook page. It's really hard to post pictures on YouTube. Head over to Facebook. There's a link in the description below to my page, and you can message me the picture on there. So I actually have it. Do not try and just describe the picture with words. Because if you try to describe the picture of New Jersey firing her guns, I don't know what that is, bro. Send me the picture, and we will add it to our list to do in future Pictures Worth 1,000 Words. So, try and guess that other battleship in the comment section down below. We might post that one next week, or it might be a couple weeks from now. Otherwise, Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to continue donating to support the museum and our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.